everybody. Hi, I'm Dwayne Melancon. I'm the CTO of Tripwire, and one of the things I do a lot of my job is travel around and spend a lot of time in hotel rooms, and one of the best ways to kill time in a hotel room is to play video games. How many people play video games? Really? Okay, a lot. So one of my favorites has been the Diablo series. Anybody play Diablo? Cool. And one of the things that I also do is spend a lot of my time looking for models and repeatable patterns and things like that we can apply from one part of the world to another. So, like for example, I spend a lot of time working with people on change management projects, and one of the easiest models to absorb is how to reconcile what should be there with what isn't. And you can take a model from my first job at McDonald's, where they count out the cash drawer at the end of the night and make sure it matches the receipts to say, okay, everything's as it should be. So I look for models like that where we can apply one model from one part of the world to to security or to business or to something else. And one of the things I do when I play video games is I have these aha moments about things that make connections and repeatable kind of either models or constructs or methods that we can apply to different parts of life. And today I'll be talking about how we can apply some of the models from from video games and information security. So let's start off with what are the elements of a successful game. So as you play the game, you want to win. And how do you do that? You want to meet your objectives along the way. You want to be able to improve, advance, and receive recognition. Who doesn't like to be at the top of the leaderboard, or to see that you've gone up a level, or you've beat the boss, or something like that? And you earn more resources along the way. I also need to be able to defend myself. I need to be able to ensure that I'm successful in getting to my larger objective. So as you go through, there are these little mini quests, and then there's always kind of the bigger objective of beating the game at the end of this. So going into the game with that in mind, you can start to look at some of the aspects of this and how does it work and how do I apply this to information security? Well, the first is deciding what character you are and what your relative strengths and weaknesses are. So this happens to be an assortment of some of the characters from one of the versions of Diablo and Diablo 3. And each one of these character classes has different strengths and weaknesses. Some are very fast and not very strong. Some are very smart and can use magical spells. Others have to rely more on physical attributes and things like that. So part of this is as you move into your world and securing your infrastructure, try to figure out what skills you have. What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And then how do you augment that? So some of the things that we can look at are, do I need to strengthen my capabilities in a specific way? So how do I build a well-rounded party? So if you are a magic user, you're probably going to want to team up with somebody who is a weapon-wielding hack and slash kind of character in a video game. Well, what are the kinds of things that you can do in your world, in the business world, to be able to mirror that? So, if you're really good at processing transactions, you're not really good at security, you're going to want to find a partner that's really good at security. So how do you round out that skill set? How do you find people within your own team that can build the skill set of your team so that you can compensate for gaps you have? If you have people who are really good at application performance but not really good at application security, well, that will tell you what kinds of resources either you need to build or hire a mercenary or hire a contractor like you would in a video game to round that out. The other part of this is to keep in mind that you're not just going to build an unnatural skill on your own. You may have to pay to get these skills, either for hiring or for paying a third-party provider or a partner to be able to provide these skills. So one of the keys here is that as you build this set of capabilities, remember, you often have to look outside of your own walls, and you can look for either certifications or training or partners that can help augment your skill set. The next aspect is when you look at your skills, one of the advantages of a video game, whether you play Diablo or anything else, most of these have some kind of a notion of a character sheet where you can look at a character and you can gauge some standardized strengths and weaknesses. In this case, we're looking at strength and dexterity and intelligence and vitality, and you can kind of study up and figure out what those skills are good for, what classes they're well suited for, and what they're not. You also want to look at some of the innate skills, and some of those might be problem-solving skills. Some of those might be the ability to maybe development experience. So as you look at skills, try to look at the well-rounded attributes of you, your team, and your partners to try to figure out what you're good at and what you're not, where your holes are, and that can also help you identify areas that you need to strengthen. Another aspect of this is that, came up in the last talk, is you got to think like an attacker and a defender. So not only in the video game world, not only do you have to go out and, fight things and get through the maze to get to the treasure, but along the way you have to keep yourself safe, you have to keep yourself healthy. One of the aspects of this is that when you look at your capabilities within your team, try to be as objective as possible. So try to build a catalog of what the skills, certifications, capabilities you have, look at the technology that you're using, try to be as objective as possible. Have a plan. Once you identify gaps, have a plan to either augment those with skills or technology so that you can fill in the gaps and increase your chances of success. Another aspect that we have in common with video games and information security is that you gain a lot by reducing your attack surface. When you select countermeasures, for example, in a video game, you're looking for shields, you're looking for armor, you're looking for, maybe protection spells or whatever, but you're looking for things that will make you less vulnerable as a target and increase your chances of surviving an attack. And you have to take that same kind of mindset and look at not just, what damage can I deal, but what damage am I expecting to encounter, and how do I best protect myself against that? Another aspect of this is that when you're dealing with this, you need to be able to have the ability to do comparative analysis of what are my capabilities now. If I invest differently, how do my capabilities change? So one of the things I think that's great about video games, but lousy about information security, is that in video games it's really easy to objectively compare strengths and weaknesses, weapons, countermeasures, and things like that. In the information security world, it's much harder. So what I recommend is having a discussion with some of your team members where you come up with criteria that you use to evaluate these tools and try to get as standardized as you can of how you evaluate, one countermeasure versus another, one set of skills versus another, and assess what the gaps and needs are of your team. Now, as you get out in combat, one of the other things about video games is that there's a lot of information that's at your disposal all the time. So you can get a clear picture of how healthy am I, what are the resources and countermeasures available to me. You can look at your overall health. You can look at if you've got other members in parties. You can look at their health too. And this is important as you kind of engage with whether it's a third-party provider, whether it's distributed teams. How do you keep tabs on how people are doing and whether they need help? One of the aspects of this is that you have to really stop thinking about things in a silo. You have to look at them more holistically, be able to zoom out and look at the system of security that you've implemented and make sure that you're not only looking after the things directly in your control, but the things that are influenced and the things that coexist with you. The other is to make sure that you continuously monitor the environment and your current status, your health, and make sure that you take appropriate action to be able to prevent catastrophic damage. Another part of this is, as you move through this, don't forget that everybody likes to be rewarded, everybody likes to be recognized, and one of the other aspects of this is that sometimes you may have a capability or a set of experience that hasn't ever been used in the organization before, but when you encounter a new threat or a new security situation, you may be able to call on your past experience. Make sure your team knows about that. Make sure that you actually share information about what your innate capabilities are, what your expertise can, what expertise you can bring to bear from previous experience so that people can appreciate your full value. So as you move through this, some of the things that are common between information security and video games is you need to track what's important. So sometimes you have the ability to go after multiple targets or, maybe deal with multiple threats. Always keep in mind what is the most important thing. What is the biggest threat that would most compromise my success? How do I continuously monitor and keep an eye on my health, whether that's, availability, whether it's security, whether it's, incident volume, whatever the indicators are, make sure that you have clear line of sight and that you share that with your team, and make sure that you know what your options are in an emergency. So for example, in video games, one of the things you do if your health starts to get low, you often have health potions, or you have spells you can cast or something like that. So you know that you're monitoring your status, and you don't want to be surprised when you see that your health starts to drop. You need to be able to administer some kind of a remedy. Same kinds of things should be on your mind as you secure infrastructure. Look for the things that are causing harm to your business, that are impeding transaction flow, that are jeopardizing customer information, whatever that may be, and determine what your course of action will be. Sometimes that might be deploying a CERT team. Sometimes that might be calling in, a third-party security contractor that you have a relationship with. But understand what your countermeasures are, and as you move through this, strategically decide what your health potion looks like, in terms of different situations and different scenarios. One of the things that I spend a lot of time with various organizations on doing is setting up a security, actually the acronym we often use is RSOB, which we like, but it's the Risk and Security Oversight Board, which is a cross-functional group that discusses the key risks that the organization is concerned about, decides where the biggest problems are, decides which resources to deploy to respond to those, and then can often give you guidance on, if I have to pick between several different options or several different threats, which one's going to be the most likely to cause problems for the business, therefore which one would I prioritize ahead of the others. If I have a breach, how do I respond? Do I have third-party contractors available to deal with things like PR? Do I have security and forensics investigation resources available? So how do I build a set of responses to allow me that as I become compromised or as I experience a security incident, that I know where to go and I know what to do, and these are all existing relationships. The other aspect, once you get out into combat, there are some other areas that you need to keep in mind. So in the world of Diablo, one of the things that you have is a clear focus on your objectives. And one of the interesting things about adventure games is that you often have like a primary quest or a secondary quest, and you can decide where you want to spend your time. Sometimes it depends on the goal. If the goal is to win the game, you may focus only on primary quests. If the goal is to increase your experience and round out your experience and maybe gain more resources and better weapons, then you may go off on a whole bunch of different side quests. But you need to be able to set a clear context for your team and for your party so that you all understand what are we doing and why, what are the key objectives, which ones are primary, which ones are optional. And if you have a lot of threats flying at you, you need to be able to prioritize and focus everyone on the biggest threat or the biggest objective that will drive the greatest win. The other aspect here is that don't forget about your chat icon. Communicate with the rest of your team. Make sure everyone knows what you're doing, when you need help, when you're winning, all of the kind of the good and the bad, so that everyone can stay on the same page. Make sure as you learn new things, there's a new lore button here, that you share that so that you build an organization and a culture that fosters learning. As you move through life and you deal with threats, you learn more things. So how do you make sure that the entire team learns that? It doesn't just live in your head or in your best incident response person's head, and be able to propagate that information on whether it's an internal knowledge base, whether it's done through brown bags or through team meetings. Make sure that that information gets shared across the organization so that the entire organization's skill set improves. Another aspect is do not forget reward and recognition. Whether it's information security, video games, raising your kids, people thrive on praise. They thrive on recognition. So look for opportunities to talk about key wins. Could be a small win in the grand scheme of things, but to that person it's a big thing if they learn a new skill or they stop an attack or they're able to improve a process or improve a response in a certain way. And don't overlook the value of spot compensation and giving people rewards so that they can do more and become motivated to move on to the next thing. So kind of the key lessons here are make sure that as you move through life and you're defending and attacking, that you keep an eye on the team and any partners and any, in this case in Diablo you use mercenaries, but you're building out a big party of people that you need to look after. Make sure that you work together, that you have the means to communicate in real time and after the fact so that you can build a culture of learning. Make sure everyone's focused on what's important and you're tracking progress against that specific goal. And then don't forget about the rewards and recognition aspect of this, because everybody wants to feel like they're winning and getting better. So now you've gained more resources, you've gotten some recognition, maybe you've gotten greater responsibility. So what do you do with all the loot? And one of the things that you have to evaluate is, I have limited resources, even though I may have gotten more resources, how am I going to spend those? And this is where you start to look at the objective evaluation of what you have versus what you think you want. And I'll zoom in here a little bit on, in video games, one of the great things is you have the ability in most of these games to objectively compare one item to another. I wish it was, there's no such thing as a +1 firewall, and if there was, you'd question the definition, right? But, if we could start to look at this. When I zoom in here, one of the things, you may be tempted to go with the bigger numbers better. 91 is bigger than 74, so I should put on the 74 armor. Well, maybe not. So you've got to look at this holistically, not just based on one score, like, events per second or whatever the main indicator is that somebody's trying to sell you. Start looking at the sub-attributes of this, because when I dig into this armor with 74 allows me to earn more gold. It allows me to regenerate more life per second. It reduces my cooldown, which is my ability to use my skills better. It increases a couple of other attributes that are important to me. And then this is kind of my get-out-of-jail-free card. In Diablo 3, there's this thing called the town portal that allows you to go through a little hole, go back to town, restock, and come back. This can't be interrupted if I'm wearing this item. So all of a sudden, this 74 looks a lot better. So, the main thing is to try to look at not just one value from the countermeasures that you select. So when you're buying a security product or you're buying some kind of technology, look at it holistically. Don't base it on just one attribute. Look at it in terms of how it best measures, how it's best measured against the things that are valuable to you, to the things that will help you in these circumstances. So what we're really trying to do is get in the habit and building a competency around objectively evaluating our tools, both the strengths and the vulnerabilities of those tools. So we go in with our eyes open so that we're clear about what threats we expect to encounter. If you're in a business that doesn't get a lot of DDoS attacks, don't go buy a bunch of DDoS. If you're in a business that is being attacked in a specific way, try to find the countermeasures that match. In the Diablo world, if I'm fighting a bunch of monsters that are going to freeze me, buying something that protects me from fire really doesn't help a lot. So what we want to be able to do is try to communicate and anticipate what our threats are expected to look like, and then invest in countermeasures that allow us to better deal with those threats. And then the other part of this is to make sure that you don't get too attached to that, because the threat environment changes a lot. So look for resilience. Look for, as you move through Diablo, the nature of the threats change. One phase you might be dealing with poison, another you're dealing with fire, another you're dealing with, things trying to freeze you, and you need to adjust your countermeasures. The same is true in security. As the threat environment changes, as the business conditions change, as you maybe acquire a new company, or the profile of your company in the world changes, you may have to adjust. So don't get too attached to any one single piece of technology, and remember that there are no silver bullets that solve every specific situation. So, to the best of your efforts, you've done everything. You've put on the right armor, you've prepared yourself, but you still die. What do? Do you give up? Do you walk away? No. You have to adapt. In the case of, how many people have jumped into a multiplayer game and immediately gotten their head shot off? Okay. Not fun, is it? So what do? I advise not jumping directly back into that same multiplayer game, because I think I did that with a couple of games where I just kept jumping in, kept immediately getting killed, and it wasn't any fun. So what do? You kind of take a step back, and you find ways to develop your skills. So you can, in the video game world, you can maybe play in single player mode for a while, get some skills down. Play in a smaller, less hostile, or more friendly game to build up your competency and get used to playing in a multiplayer environment. You can go read strategy guides You can go look at YouTube walkthroughs where someone else goes through and you can learn strategies from them. The key is that you don't just give up. You go back and you develop your skills and your capabilities. You look for new and different approaches and you adapt and you move back in and try to get better. So first thing is practice. And in the information security world, we need to provide opportunities for people to practice. So give them labs to play in. Give them sandboxes to play in. Allow them to go to training. Actually, a phenomenal sets of trainings are offered at Black Hat every year, where you can sit down in a live lab environment and you go through either capture the flag or team versus team kinds of scenarios, and it allows you to develop your skills and get better at developing the habits and muscle memory in a very safe environment. So make sure your team has the opportunity to do that. Study other people's experiences. Read through post-incident reports if you have access to them. Go talk to people who have had compromises that you think you might experience in the future, and find ways to learn from their experience. Look for anything you can that will help you determine what you should look for, how to respond, and how to improve your chances of success in the specific kind of attack scenario. Have a fallback position. In video games, it's important to save often, because sometimes you get caught up in the heat of the moment and you go out and you die and you realize you've got a huge setback because you haven't saved in 3 hours and you've all of a sudden wiped away 3 hours worth of progress. The same thing can happen if somebody wipes out one of your servers and you can't rebuild it. You're going to have to restore. If you're restoring from several months ago, you're screwed. So make sure you have a fallback position, that you know what your response is. At all costs, you may have to pull the plug, rebuild, and start over. Make sure that's as pain-free as possible. It will always hurt, but you can take steps along the way to make it less painful. And that includes having a clear idea of how do I provision infrastructure, where is it provisioned, who can provision it, how do I build secure infrastructure, all those attributes. And if you're not into DevOps yet, study DevOps. DevOps is a great way to integrate this and to have a repeatable, rapid-paced cookbook to be able to do some of these things in a much more resilient manner. But the key thing is to get back in there. And often there's kind of this tendency that if a bad thing happens, a security breach, sometimes people lose their jobs, which may be appropriate in certain circumstances, but most of the time you are now kicking experience out. Going through an attack, even if it's unsuccessful, you will learn more than anything you read in a book or experience in a class. So one of the things I recommend is to not allow people to become demoralized and not just get rid of them because there was a security incident, but bring them back in and learn from that and allow them to be a conduit for us to never have this happen again. So one of the things to do is focus on, it gets back to that culture of learning. How do I exchange information? How do I learn from failures and successes? And how do I, give people a meaningful role even if things didn't go well, 1 or 2 times around? So the other aspect of this is as you go through and you start, things can go well. So, this happens to be kind of near the end of Diablo. So things are great, right? So how many people have been where you feel like we just, somebody attacked us, we deflected it, we defended it, everything went great, we were awesome? Anybody got? Yeah, it's a great feeling. And it's like when you get to the end game and you have the congratulations screen up, it's so phenomenal. Well, one of the differences, like with video games, you can stop here. In life, you're not going to stop. There's always a much more difficult mode. There's they used to call it hell mode. Now it's, normal, hard, expert, master, and torment mode. So I kind of live parts of my life in torment mode, it feels like. But, one of the things to keep in mind here is that this doesn't end once you've stopped one attack. This is a continuous cycle. So you have to go back through this cycle again and evaluate your strengths and weaknesses. You have to look at the strengths and weaknesses of your partners. You have to look at how you're going to continuously monitor your health and your status. You have to look at how you're going to reward people, how you're going to develop their skills, how you're going to bring them all together and allow them to, it's the rising tide that lifts all boats, where the organization gets stronger as you go through this together. And that really is what this is all about. It's single-player games are fun, multiplayer games are way more fun, a lot more unpredictable, but that's really where you can develop a true sense sense of mastery with all of this. So when you bring it all together, one of the things that is important is to keep in mind what are the attributes of how you succeed in video games. This is an expanded version of this. I want to know where I am and what my goals are. I want to quantify my capabilities and the resources at my disposal. I want to be able to understand the threat environment, how it's changing, and what my enemy's capabilities are so that I can appropriately configure countermeasures to be able to deal with that. I need to be able to evaluate my own capabilities comparatively so that I don't get blindsided. I need to be able to adapt and adjust. Unexpected things will happen. Business requirements will change. Budgets will get cut. Your internet connection may drop. All these kinds of things can happen. So you've got to understand what the scenarios are so that you can respond appropriately. And to do that, you need to be able to align the skills and the technology, your strategy, your tactics, and everything to maximize your chances of success, which means you've got to be clear about the goal, and you've got to be able to quickly evaluate your current status and your progress over time. So what does this look like? I've been working with a number of organizations that are trying to, call it gamification or whatever, but to try to make this more fun and more interesting to their staff. So here's a sample of some of the ideas that I've heard from them and I've seen beginning to be implemented. First is develop character sheets for your staff. One of the organizations I work with is kind of a very creative organization, and they not only have character sheets, but they have like avatars for people. So people have like big barbarian poses and Catwoman suits and all kinds of cool things hanging on their walls, along with lists of some of their key attributes and key achievements, and it becomes very fun. And they're now considering, using these Moo cards and creating trading cards so that you can kind of, try to get a full set and say, here's our team, and we just reconfigured our project resources. Here's what our team looks like now. So that can be a lot of fun. And the key there is that once you start sharing this information, people might ask about, you've got this skill listed. How'd you get that? What do you do? What does that mean? How do I do that? And you start to propagate more learning throughout the team in that way. Another is to give them the opportunity to practice. You can do this, I mentioned before, with capture the flag. You can do red versus blue. You can send people to simulated security training. There are a lot of different ways to do that, but don't underestimate the power of that hands-on experience, even if it is in a safe environment. If you've ever been in one of those classes, you know that first 5 minutes, it feels like just fun and games. After that, you're in. You become fully immersed, and you take it personally when the other team attacks you and you can't defend. So it really does give you that same adrenaline rush that you would get in real life. So I mentioned before fostering information sharing, but let's talk a little bit about recognition. What does that look like? Creating a leaderboard to display and celebrate achievements is one good way. That team that I mentioned that has the character sheets, they also have, when their CERT team successfully closes an incident, people get these little stars that they can hang on their tracking sheets to be able to say that they've successfully dealt with these. They're different color stars that signify different things. Like, for example, the complexity of the attack, the amount of business impact that they perceive to have been saved can change the color of those. The gold stars are the ones that protected the business the most. Green stars are the ones that help develop their skills the most. So they have these discussions kind of in the post-mortem to be able to determine what color star should this guy get or this team get. And it becomes kind of this, kind of a badge of honor kind of an approach. Recognize when people develop new skills, or they've completed a new security project, or when they've gone to classes and achieved a certification. I mentioned the incident response and detection, but if somebody does some killer research and knowledge sharing, like they just do a brown bag internally with your team to let them know what they just learned about this new threat that you expect to be facing in the next few months, that should be rewarded. That should be something that's recognized and tracked so that people get credit for this kind of off-the-clock work that they often do to be able to make the skills of the team better. I've seen another, this is the other, a lot of these come from one specific company that I'm working with, but internal titles, badges, and ranks for doing, kind of badass security stuff, where, people, if you ever look in Diablo 3, there are all these weird names for items and quests and things like that. They've made up their own item names and quests, and there are people that have like the Vorpal badge where they've beheaded an attacker, or they've people that have there are a lot of ninja titles, which shouldn't surprise you, but there were also a lot of, this one organization uses a lot of titles and designations from the Lord of the Rings. So find something that resonates with your team, give them the ability to have these internal titles and ranks. They're actually toying with putting those on their business cards. HR's giving them some pushback, and they're saying, okay, well, there's a difference between our HR title and our external title. Can we just, so we'll see how that turns out, but I think it's a great idea. Inside our company, if you detect and mitigate a really hard security problem, each month we award somebody this unicorn head, which, believe it or not, is an honor. And this is one of our guys, Kent, who's proudly wearing his unicorn head. Yeah, you know Kent, don't you? Yeah. And people walk around the office carrying this unicorn head and occasionally put it on. It stinks inside, but it's still an awesome thing. So find something, and it doesn't have to be expensive, but it's something that helps people feel recognized, feel important, have some visible recognition, and gives them something to really kind of shoot for and strive for. The other aspect is don't underestimate money, right? Spot bonuses and rewards for a job well done. Sometimes, it could be Starbucks gift cards or Amazon gift cards or whatever kinds of things that you want to give. But when somebody's done something that's really cool, give them the ability to feel good about that. And again, on the HR side, there are thresholds that kick in all kinds of tax BS, but work with your organization to make sure that this doesn't break any rules in terms of compensation, but still gives people the feeling that I've done something and I've been recognized and rewarded for this, and it doesn't have to be extremely expensive. And then another aspect of this, and this is something that I've seen a couple of organizations do, where when you do some really killer research, give people the visibility in front of either the board or the operating committee or executive staff or whoever it happens to be able to go up and present situational analysis to the execs of the company. Now, a lot of times when you bring this forth to people, they're kind of introverted people who would prefer to work in a dark room, and the thought of facing them feels a lot like facing Diablo, right? So they're like, I don't want to get in front of this group. But keep in mind, these guys need information that we have. They value what we do, and in light of some of the high-profile breaches and compromises and things like that, I think a lot of these business executives, non-technical executives, are a lot hungrier for what we have to offer than they ever were before. So some things that you can keep in mind when you communicate beyond your own game is that business leaders want to know about harm. We talk about risks and threats. They're concerned about harm. Harm to the assets that affect their organization's goals and priorities. Because we talk about, in the game, you've got goals and priorities. In the business, they've got goals and priorities, and they want to know how you're defending those and what could most threaten those and what we're doing about that. They're also looking for concrete steps. They don't want to just know that the threat exists. They want your recommendations, and they want your thoughts on what we can actually do to take action to mitigate or minimize the chance that this harm will actually happen. Or in the case of, if you've got a breach, how do we recover most quickly and get ourselves back on track as easily and as quickly as possible. And for that, they need to understand a timely view of the risks, threats, vulnerabilities, impact, criticality, and likelihood. Now, they're not going to want to hear those words necessarily. What they're going to want to hear is, back to this, how does the harm affect their goals, whether it's share price, customer retention. If you don't know what those words are, if you are working for a public company, read the annual report. Those words, what the business goals, business objectives, business criteria will be clearly articulated there. If you have internal newsletters, that might be a good place to find that. Go have a conversation with people about, maybe with your CFO or somebody in the controller's office about what are the key initiatives the company's going about this year and what are people most concerned about. Find the person, this is one little secret I'll let you in on. One person that tends to have a really good picture of that is whoever in your financial service or your financial organization, whoever it is that prepares the board packets for the execs, attacks probably has a pretty good idea what is prioritized in, what's prioritized out, what kinds of things they want to hear and they monitor and pay attention to, which things they don't, and they can give you a good sense of if you're going to tell this story, relate it back to some of those priority issues. So we talked at the beginning about these elements of successful gaming, and I would say that they're not just the elements of successful gaming, they're actually the elements of successful business. So as we move through this, we have to keep in mind how we're going to win by meeting our objectives along the way, be really clear about those objectives, be able to improve, advance, and most importantly, receive recognition and reward, and earn more resources along the way. I want to be able to defend myself and ensure the successful achievement of my larger objectives. So that's common to video games, it's common to business. If we keep that in mind, I think things get a lot easier. Now this is kind of an ongoing saga for me. So if you're interested in this, please keep the conversation going. If you've got ideas, you want to share ideas, you want to hear about how other people are approaching this. I don't have my email on here, but it's really easy. It's just dm@tripwire.com. And I blog about this and other topics on the Tripwire blog, and that's a shortcut to it. Or you can follow me on Twitter. So with that, I think we have a few minutes for questions, if anyone is interested. Yes?
You mentioned that quantifying the risk threat environment was important, and that was a question that was mentioned downstairs as well. And you mentioned that communicating risk assessment and managing this kind of IT risk is important to bring to external to the IT part of the organization. Have you been on to methods or ways to quantify those things? Not strictly insurance, actuarial, and kind of in between. It's a fuzzy area.
Yeah, the quantification of risk. So there are a lot of thoughts on that. I think some of it is dependent on the culture and the tolerance of the organization. Some people insist on very rigorous financial modeling and things like that. I've seen, like if you're familiar with the FAIR framework, I've seen that be applied to factor analysis of information risk. It's been fairly resilient in terms of being able to fit it into multiple corporate cultures to work, and it is about really trying to break things down into kind of pseudo-measurable factors that you can discuss and kind of come to agreement on within the organization, and then attaching values to that, metrics to that. There are a lot of organizations I work with that are using the NIST risk management framework, which is heavier, but in more complex environments, especially ISO-oriented environments, it tends to work pretty well. So, I think the challenge here is that there is not a one-size-fits-all from a model perspective. Some are very heavy, some are very light. I mean, one of the lightest is one called binary, which is like 10 questions, but it's very good about one aspect of risk, but it's not a holistic risk framework. So, it kind of depends on what you're trying to do, and I wish there was one, it's like the unicorn, right? We're looking for the unicorn of risk management models, and I think a lot of this is, try to find people either in a similar industry and collaborate with them. There's the Society for Information Risk Analysts that does a lot of work around this. They have a very active mailing list that if you subscribe there, you can post questions and get a lot of, they're very opinionated, so you get a lot of opinion. But they're also very knowledgeable, so they can give you a lot of meaningful information. Yeah. Other questions? By the way, in the absence of a defined risk model, I find that building a cross-functional team, that risk and security oversight board, can help a lot. I'll give you an example. We decided to implement this within Tripwire, and the executive sponsors our CFO. The meeting is run by our chair, who's our chief legal counsel, but then we have people around the company that sit at the table. So there's me, there's our R&D team, there's people from sales, from marketing, from the financial side of the business, from I forget who else. Oh, well, IT, of course. We have our application group. We have a lot of people that are involved in this, and what we do is we talk about what are the key risks. HR is involved from how do we mitigate hiring risks. How do we go into contracts with a better eye for risk and reduce the likelihood that we're going to be blindsided by some, third-party problem that we didn't expect. So we have these bigger conversations, and then we focus down, okay, these are all the options. What are we going to focus on for the next year? What are we going to invest in, and which of these concern us most? We've been spending a lot of time, for example, looking at the security of our own source code and our own products to make sure that our products can't be used in a way that would compromise the integrity of our customers, and that we understand what goes in and what goes out. And if we use any open source, we want to flag it immediately so that we analyze it and make sure that there aren't known vulnerabilities being incorporated into our code base. So a lot of aspects of those are things that get invested in because they relate most to the success of our business, because we happen to be a software company. So a lot of this gets down to those conversations are where you really come to more of a corporate-wide agreement on where are our key risks, where are our key investments to mitigate those risks. And for everybody to be able to answer that question, hey, why are we spending on X and not on Y? Each one of those business stakeholders can go back to their teams and explain that in a consistent and rational and objective way. And I think that's really where a lot of this, the cool factor starts to creep into this. All right. Did I heat you up enough in here? Warm? All right, thank you.